Welcome to Photo Active, a podcast about photography in the Apple ecosystem. I'm Kirk.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
This episode is brought to you by NeoModern. NeoModern treats your photos like art, offering simple, affordable concierge printing and framing. We'll tell you more about NeoModern later in the show. This week, we have a special episode because I went into the field. Jeff, unfortunately, was not involved in this. We're recording the intro and outro to the episode afterwards. Last Friday, I went down to the southern coast of England to a town called Bosham or Bosham, depending on whether you're a local or not, where the Bosham Gallery had an exhibit of Michael Kenna's photos. Now, I've talked about Michael Kenna a lot. He is literally my favorite photographer. He makes these extraordinary black and white photos, landscapes, minimalist. There's something special about it. There was a 45-year retrospective, and I contacted Michael Kenna early this year, and we agreed that I would come down and interview him. The audio quality isn't great because we were in a gallery where sound doesn't muffle and the walls are all plaster. And
I think this is really interesting because typically our dynamic is I get out and shoot more often, and you tend to stick close to home, and yet you're the one that's going out and interviewing people in person. So I love this new dynamic that we have going on. You get to talk to interesting people, and I just get to listen to it and then go shoot, sunrises and stuff.
Yeah, the interview took about 45 minutes, and I've cut about 5 minutes out for the podcast. But we spent about 2 hours talking, and he even bought us ice cream afterwards. So,
well, if I had known there was ice cream involved, I mean, come on.
Okay, so let's go to the interview. I recommend that you listen to this with headphones. The audio quality really isn't great. Do check the show notes because there are literally dozens of photos that we're referring to. There's a link to each photo that's in the exhibit. For some that were in the exhibit but that aren't on the gallery website, there are links to photos on Michael Kenna's website. There was a little bit of a glitch that there were a couple of photos that they wanted and couldn't get, and so they had put them on the website and they didn't take them off. So if you're listening to this on a bicycle or in a car, you might want to listen to Get It Home. Look at the photos, all the links, especially in the parts where Michael is talking about the composition of the photos. And if you care about composition, this is really going to be a masterclass. I'm in Bosham on the southern coast of England at the Bosham Gallery with Michael Kenna. Michael, it's wonderful to meet you.
It's great to be here. Wonderful to meet you too.
Thanks for taking time to talk to me. Michael has an exhibition at this gallery. There are, 40-odd photos covering the entire period of your career, which there seem to be books, retrospectives of your career, 20 years, 40 years, are we up to 45 years now?
It's up to 45 years and counting, yes.
And what's year one? What does that count from?
I think from 1973 is because I was at the London School of Printing, London College of Printing, and that's, I suppose, when I first became really interested in landscape photography. So the photograph you see up there reflecting, that's from 1973. And then there's, I don't know if there's one from 74, but there's certainly one from 75 somewhere, and then it continues on. So that's kind of what the date that I use. So actually I'm in my 46th year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's actually one way you can tell the oldest photos from ones after a certain date. This is a question I was going to get to later, but let's say now. Most of your photos are square, but the older ones are in 3:2 format, so 35 millimeter film.
Yes.
And the square ones you shoot on a Hasselblad. Why did you change? Was it a compositional reason, or that you just wanted to use a Hasselblad?
I've been through many camera models in my career. I started with the Whitaker, which is my wonderful camera I bought for £25 with this multiple lenses. It was great. It's a rangefinder. And then I moved through various 35 millimeter cameras up until the mid-80s. I experimented with different formats, 4x5, 8x10, 2 1/4, 6 or 7. So I experimented with many, many different formats. It was really in the mid-80s that I started to use Hasselblad. And I think it was because there was a certain predictability about the 35 millimeter format somehow. You had to make choices right from the beginning. Should it be vertical? Should it be horizontal? And things kind of seemed to be all squashed in somehow. And the 2 1/4, I got it first of all with a waist level viewfinder, so everything was back to front. It was a completely different format for me, and it made me look more abstractly at the landscape, I think, rather than saying that's a tree or that's a person, this is a building. It just became forms and lines and shapes and densities within that rectangle. And so there was something of a breakthrough for me. And I started making big prints, 16 by 20 prints for a while. As often happens, I settled back into a kind of this is not really where I want to go. So my print size got reduced again. And now I find that I can exhibit work from 1973 or 1975, Big Ben over here, along with photographs from 2018, 2019. And they all sit quite happily in this one big family. They're presented very much the same way. I don't think my vision has changed that much in 45 years. I've gone in many, many different circles. I've done many, many different bodies of work. But they still relate to the landscape and the juxtaposition with really human objects, things we leave behind, the presence, the absence, the kind of the abstract forms that bounce off each other, that sometimes fight with each other, sometimes they get along quite well together.
But with one recent exception, no humans.
No, not many humans. There's a few birds flying around.
Lots of birds.
Yes.
But we'll talk later about your book, Rafu, which was released last year.
Of course,
It's your first book of pictures of humans,
Absolutely,
isn't it?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Why did you... Well, let's talk about how you shoot. So how many of your photos are long exposures? So we're talking 8, 10, 12 hours. Obviously, you're not going to get someone to sit for a portrait for 10 hours.
No, yes. I started as an early morning photographer. I just loved the morning light. It was so calm, still, silent. It was very beautiful. Everything was fresh. And I think at a certain point in time, I realized I wasn't being productive enough, and I started getting up earlier, going to bed later, and then I branched out to be something of a night photographer. Sometimes I'd stay up all night, photographing. So I'm known in various different places as a night photographer, as a morning photographer, as a landscape photographer, a different urban landscape photographer. Some of the exposures go for 8 hours overnight. Many of the exposures are instant also, so it's difficult to know. You could look at along any one wall and you can say instant, 5 minutes.
So that looks
instant.
like a long... That's an instant. No, that's a long exposure.
This is probably...
That's from Mont Saint-Michel, isn't it?
5 or 10 minutes,
okay.
Yes. You can see when the clouds move, when the water moves, when you want something specific. But in a case like this, for example, of the fence running up the hillside, there's no advantage in a long exposure. You don't really gain anything because it stays exactly the same. So you make choices. Here it's a longer exposure because you can see there's movement up here too. But here is a bird in the sky. That's obviously an instant exposure.
And there's one with a moonrise over there.
Yes.
How many hours was that?
That's maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It's between 1 and 2 hours.
The moon does come up pretty quickly.
Because it's actually going down. And I saw it when I was driving around this lake, and I said, I have to photograph that. But I was constricted by that time with where the moon was. And I waited. And it's a lovely luxury to watch a moon slowly descend and to be very quiet and alone and outside in the landscape at night.
And so what do you do when you're doing an 8-hour exposure? Do you sleep? Do you read? Do you listen to music?
All of those things.
Okay.
Often I leave cameras out and I go to bed and I get up, hour before sunrise and I pick the camera up. I don't know what's going on.
You go to bed near the camera? You don't leave expensive Hasselblads in the landscape?
Yeah, often in fields and places where people don't get to.
Okay.
And I have lots of funny stories. I don't know how much time you have. I have left cameras and come back and have not been there, for example, and I've had to hunt them down and found them in police stations and so forth. So you never know. Sometimes they've fallen over in the wind. Different things happen, but it's what I really love about. Many things I love about film photography, silver photography, which I insist upon doing still.
Silver photography,
yes, is that it's unpredictable.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're getting, which I love. I've experimented with digital. I took digital cameras with me and photographed landscapes. And there's something of that instant gratification that doesn't appeal to me. And there's something that it's so kind of easy to change. It doesn't have the same flavor for me. I like the process, the journey of silver, the silver process.
Yeah,
being out at night for 8 hours, not knowing if you got anything.
Yeah,
you've got to be slightly mad, I'm sure. But
and then you still have to wait for the film to be processed.
And wait for the film
because
to be processed.
You don't process your own film, do you?
Not usually. No, it's just I just found it to be not very creative part of the process.
Yeah.
And given the amount of time I have at my disposal, it was better if I gave it to a lab. And so I have labs in London, Paris, and New York, Seattle, Tokyo. Basically places I photograph, and I give them the film.
Oh, so you don't have to worry about taking it through the airport.
Whenever possible, I try not to take it through airports, but sometimes I do. I have to, but. The major hub cities, most of them still have one or two labs, decent labs that can process film.
Yeah. When I emailed you a few months ago, you had said, I had asked you for an interview, and you'd said you'd been traveling a lot and you just wanted to get back into the darkroom.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like that's your favorite part of the process, isn't it?
No, I don't think. No, I think the whole journey is my favorite part. I mean, you can't beat being out, alone in the landscape, wandering, searching, finding, discovering, these miraculous phenomena that just happen, and you're there and you're experiencing it.
And so a lot of times you're just driving around and you chance upon something and stop your car and...
Sometimes, yes, or sometimes I walk for 10 hours. I just find places. It depends where I am. Depends, for example, in Japan, in Hokkaido, that I photograph a lot. When I first started going in 2002, I went on my own. And I just into all sorts of trouble. My cameras would be soaking wet because, I'd be up to my neck in snow. The car would drive off the side of the road and I wouldn't know, and I couldn't get the car back. I'd get lorries to be pulling me on the... It was just ridiculous. So
you don't have an assistant?
Then I got a guide. And then since then I've had this same guide.
Yeah.
He has snowshoes, he has an umbrella for the snow, he has four-wheel drive, all this sort of stuff that you need. And so he will take me places,
right.
And then we wander and find things to photograph.
So you don't have a proper photographer's assistant, someone to give you the backs of your Hasselblad loaded with film.
I do pretty much everything myself.
Yeah.
I have one assistant in Seattle, Mark Silver, who's been with me now for 18, 20 years. I'm not sure how long. So he does a lot of the dry mounting, the retouching, the shipping, the inventory, scanning things. I mean, basically, I get to the really juicy, interesting part. I get to photograph and I get to print. Yeah. Those are the main two things. And I do love, back to your original question, I do love being in the darkroom. And I can spend hours and hours because it is another aspect of discovery. Even if you have a negative, you don't quite know what is there. It's like raw material, and you work with it. It's pliable. It's almost...
Because you have a lot of options in the darkroom, don't you?
Yes.
My first exposure to photography was I was in high school and I had to take a shop class, and I didn't want to do wood shop or auto shop, and they had a photography class. And I don't remember what kind of cameras we had, but we took black and white photos and we went to the darkroom. I learned how to solarize photos, which is something you do once.
Right.
And over the years I did a bit of film photography and I was fascinated, and then life changed and I moved on. But there is it's an interpretation, isn't it, when you do that? You said earlier you tried different sizes. How did you settle on this particular size? Because this to me, what are they, 7.5 inches?
7 3/4.
7 3/4.
Basically.
This to me is a size of a photograph for one person to look at personally, as opposed to something in a museum for 10 people to look at. Is that part of your reasoning?
Well, you can have one person in the museum looking at them too. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, in the gallery here, individually, but it looks more like an intimate experience.
Well, it is intimate, and we all see about 35 degrees in focus. It's just our natural animal ability to do that. So it's natural that you get to about 10 inches away from here to really see it.
Yeah.
And you can look into it and you can be a part of it. You're immersed in the landscape. The larger the print gets, the further away you go. It becomes less intimate, less engaging. And I want these to be almost individual conversations with individual collectors, people, viewers, whoever goes. But as I say, if a print is in a museum, you can still wander up to it. I mean, I love small, tiny, jewel-like creations anyway. So I experimented with. I even did kind of almost wall-size prints for a while, just to kind of see. I did a lot of 16 by 20s. This still feels like the correct size, the most appropriate size for my work, for my particular vision. Not for everybody, of course, but for the way I see this is the way I like to present them.
I grew up in New York City, and I worked for a couple of years near the Museum of Modern Art.
Oh, yes.
And I would go in there often, and my favorite painting was Dali's Persistence of Memory, which is about an 8 by 10 in landscape format.
Yes, yeah.
And you'd have to get up really close to see it, and then you'd see it. If it was bigger, like Guernica, Picasso's Guernica, it's imposing, but it doesn't make you enter the image, does it?
Yes.
That's
you're
the thing.
Looking at it more than being part of it.
Yeah, exactly. So in the darkroom, you don't just print these. You spend a lot of time dodging and burning, don't you? And that's really the technique that makes them yours.
Yes. Well, reality doesn't necessarily conform to the way I want it to be. And there's a way of, you could call it manipulation, but it's I would say it's more of a guidance system that you're able, as a printer, to guide the viewer into specific areas where you want that viewer to go to. And it's a matter of balancing.
This one that's on the wall, so this is a bit of a low wall at Mont Saint-Michel. Mm-hmm. If I look at it, it's dark in the lower left and lower right corners, and the wall is leading to the left. So is that your goal, is to create that motion, to make the eye travel there?
I think with many of my images, I have pathways, I have directions, I have tunnels of trees, whatever, so I have boardwalks that go out, because I'm creating something of a stage for the viewer to go onto and to be on their own, to be solitary. And so this, yes, you go from, naturally in a black and white photograph, you go from dark to light. It's just the way we see. Yeah. So naturally you come in here and you wander along and you kind of go out here. This is the lightest. It's not by coincidence. That's the lightest part. Yeah. Everything guides you to that corner and out into a place where you don't know what's there. And I love that there's a question mark.
So, it's not an answer, it's a question, there's a mystery, there's a... It's open-ended.
Yeah, and I think we're naturally inquisitive animals. We want to see what's behind there. And that, just that enigma, that illusion, that kind of use of our own creative imagination is very important to me.
So you did shoot color in the early years, I know.
I did, yes.
Have you destroyed all those photos?
I came across a whole box of transparencies recently, actually, particularly from my student years.
Yeah.
And that was for, my senior thesis at school was about body motion studies. So we had all these models come in.
Like Muybridge's things with the horses and...
Yeah, like Muybridge, but more like Harold Edgerton, I would say, with stroboscopes. And I had pools of water with photograph reflectance and different colours, and I had models kind of like puppets, and it was a wonderful third-year project that I did. Now everything was in colour. And I photographed landscapes in colour too for a long time. But
so what made you make the correct choice to go into black and white? Note I say that because I personally love black and white photography because it doesn't tell me everything.
I think a lot of my work is about distillation. It's about reducing things that are bare essentials to eliminating the inessential, editing. And I think black and white, generally, you have to use your imagination more. You can create your own colors. It's quieter, it's more harmonious, it's more meditational something. It's almost like a haiku poem that you can present a few essentials and allow the imagination of the viewer to fill in the rest. I personally find color is just there's too much. We see in color all the time. It becomes a reflectance of reality, and it doesn't allow our imagination. In the darkroom also I found it, I was a color printer, just because I had to at certain points in my career. I can deal with color, I can print color.
It's a different process, isn't it?
Because if the sky is just 5% off in cyan or yellow, it's gone.
Yeah, and we can recognize that. We can notice if the skin's wrong, if the sky's wrong, if the grass is too yellow. We notice that,
But here, I can print skies black or white or grey. I can do anything I want. And somehow our imagination allows it still to be real. We can say, that could exist somehow.
I've been thinking a lot about black and white photography recently. I've been trying to write an article. I don't like the word semiotics, but my article is about the semiotics, about the weight of a black and white image. We have the beginning of the history of photography in black and white.
Yes.
Then color comes along, but black and white still has this weight as reportage, as news photography, because newspapers, at least in the States, didn't turn to color until the 80s for USA Today, the 90s for New York Times.
Yes.
So black and white photography seemed more serious, even though we had Life magazine and all that.
But now I think it's most things are in color.
Well, but also
you have black and white.
But also, it's so easy to make a black and white photo with an Instagram filter or whatever.
Of course.
My camera is here, and I have it set to black and white mode when I walk around to shoot photos because I find it more interesting to see that abstraction than to be distracted by the colors in some ways. I was listening to an interview that you did with someone on YouTube, and I found that there was a really interesting statement that you made. And do you agree that your photography is minimalist?
Some of it, certainly, yes.
Because this is a word that represents a certain kind of photography these days, isn't it? And you said, I feel like I instigated the Sticks in Water School of Photography.
Yes.
And every time I see those, I keep thinking, who are the people who go around and put all the sticks in the waters for people to do long exposures, right?
Yes, I don't know. I look back at my student days, and I have all these photographs of sticks in water or pebbles in water, or things in water with long exposures, even way back then. And at the time, it was not a subject to be photographed.
Yeah.
People didn't do it. Why photograph sticks in water? It made no sense at all. But now it seems that everybody photographs sticks in water, and it was a tongue in cheek. It was a jest when I said I feel like I'm.
But it's true in a way because it has become a bit of a cliche. You see in photography magazines how to do that.
It's everywhere now.
The other day on Instagram, I saw a photo almost exactly like that one. I'm pointing to the one of the fence in Hokkaido in the snow.
Right.
Probably the same fence taken on a different angle.
Could be.
I wonder if the person actually just copied your photo and.
Well, I think these days, particularly, there's a big business in photo tours, in guiding people around places. Like in Ansel Adams, they could guide them around Yosemite. Say, Ansel photographed this at this time of the day, and here we walked up this mountain, and you can see how the waterfall looks now in this light. And I find, particularly in Hokkaido, there are so many guided tours now of places, and again, I don't want to point fingers at myself at all, but many of them are, Michael Kenna photographed this particular tree, and it to the point that unfortunately the landscape suffers. There's been a few instances of where the farmer has actually cut down trees because they've become so popular that whole groups, coachloads of tourists come to photograph these trees, and they tramp through the field, even if there are signs all the way around saying "Do not go on the field." They'll go through the field and take photographs, and the farmers cut the tree down.
Well, let's talk about one, the Kusharo Lake tree, which I'm pointing at up on the wall. There's a very interesting story behind this.
Mm-hmm. Tell me.
Tell me. Because you shot hundreds of photos of this tree, didn't you? And you've published a number of versions of it.
Yeah, I found it, first of all, I think it was in 2002. I just was in, that's another version of it.
Yeah.
It was just a beautiful tree, and I was walking by along this lake, and I came across it. And like with many of my photographs, I never quite connect at the moment of photographing. I realize myself that I cannot predict, this is going to be a great photograph. I hope they're all going to be great, but most of the time.
But since you can't see it until the negatives are processed.
Yes, it's happened so many times. But I photographed this particular tree, and Kusharo Lake tree, and it came out. It just looked like this bonsai, beautiful, just gorgeous woodblock print somehow. I printed it. And then the following year, I was in Hokkaido, and I thought, I really should go back to that same place, because that's one of the things I do, is I go back and back and back to the same places I photograph, because I find that they're always slightly different, and I can not necessarily improve on them, but I can make variations of a theme in a sense. So I went back and I photographed the tree again, completely differently, and it lost some of its limbs. And I found that I just had this connection with this tree, as I like to have connections with trees throughout the world, but this particular tree...
Yeah, you shoot a lot of trees.
I do. Yeah. And I went back for many, many years. And every time I went to Hokkaido, I tried to find this tree, and I tried to photograph it again. But 7 or 8 years later, it was eventually cut down, because it was on the side of a lake, and it was in a campsite, which I didn't actually know, because I only went there in the winter.
Right.
There's nobody there. And
it wasn't cut down because people were photographing.
No, I don't. I hope not. I don't want that on my conscience too.
It is a lovely image. It's stark. There's the idea of an old person. There's the idea of age and wisdom. There's that contrast with the stark background. There's so much in that simple image.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Neo-Modern is not just a frame store, but a unique, high-quality service for professionals and consumers set up to help make your images the best they can be. All their staff are photographers and Adobe experts, and Neo-Modern works with you to make gorgeous works from your images that you'll be proud to hang on your walls. You can drop into Neo-Modern's gallery in San Francisco, bringing your photos in any format. You can make an appointment with Neo-Modern's print masters, or you can get the Neo-Modern concierge experience online at neomodern.com. Neomodern provides museum-quality printing and framing at affordable prices. Visit neomodern.com, drop into the gallery at 1898 Union Street in San Francisco, or call 415-901-3411. And if you come to the Union Street Gallery, you can always see an assortment of the Rubin collection of classic photographs on display, along with selected works from customers.
One more thing. Use the code PODCAST, PODCAST, to get 20% off anything on the Neomodern site.
You mentioned that you have used digital cameras. Do you use digital cameras at all now? Or when you take snapshots of your family, do you do long exposures of them?
No, they wouldn't stay in place long enough. I have a phone, so when I wander around, and nowadays when I'm photographing something, I could be making a long exposure. I will usually take a quick snap because it gives me the location. Sometimes I play around with it and just edit it just to see what it vaguely looks like. It's never the same as the real thing on film, but yes, I do that photo, and I like to post things to my family and family chats and so they know what I have. But
you're not entirely anti-digital.
No. I mean, it could be the meal I'm eating and say, oh look, having breakfast. This is what.
I hope you're not going to go on Instagram and start posting pictures of food.
Not yet. No.
But have you ever considered doing a book of photos? I mean, you've done a book of photos taken with a Holga.
Yes.
Ever considered doing a book of photos that you've shot with a digital camera? With a phone?
I haven't considered it because I've never put in enough effort to do that. I mean, I recently actually got together my phone pictures for a project. One of my agents asked me specifically, and I put together 40 or 50 images, and they look very good. It's different somehow.
Yeah.
It works fine on Instagram and on the phone, on the computer, but when you actually come to print them, they just fall apart.
Yeah, when you've been doing this for decades, and the printing process is so important, I can't see it. I mean, it would change the perception people have of your work in a way.
Yes, yeah, but that's life is like that. You're always making some sort of variation changes, and life changes. It's okay. That wouldn't worry so much.
Before we look at individual photos, I want to just mention some of your titles of photos are quite interesting. Some of them are a number of things, and there's one of them that I spotted on your website that is 475 birds that you shot in Durham, England. You actually counted all the birds rather than just saying a flock of birds.
Well, I have a lot of titles that have flocks of birds or murder of crows or whatever they are, or things like that. But I'm actually putting a bird book together. I'm in the process, so I've been printing birds for the past 6 months. A publisher in France who just did Penti Similati, beautiful book, gorgeous book, wanted me. He said, I notice you have many birds in your photographs. You want to look through your archive? And I said, well, I probably don't have that many, but looking through my archive all the way back, 45 years, it's amazing how many photographs of birds I have. So this book will
birds, trees, sticks in water.
This book will come out in the fall.
Okay. So we're going to look at a photo here, which is named.
It's Huangshan, but I don't know what study.
It's from Huangshan.
Huangshan Study 25.
Huangshan Study 25. And this to me is an extraordinary composition. There will be links in the show notes so you can look at all these photos. I love the composition here, the way you've taken that central tree and you've put it so far on the side. And so it draws the eye to the right. Then you look down to the left and you look into the valley. It's like there's intense mystery. Was it when you saw this, was it obvious that you needed to put that tree like that on the right?
I think you said it all already. I find when I photograph, I experiment. I talked about the unpredictable nature of still photography before, so usually I do the predictable photograph to begin with, which may be having this in the center or to the left, because we're left to right. We're in China, and photographing in Asia a lot, and I've noticed there's a different perspective that goes on, and it's greatly influenced my work, in fact, that there is a right to left or the bottom to top way of viewing things. So I suspect, without looking at my contact sheets, that I made many photographs of this particular tree on this particular rock. And this is the one that looked most interesting when I did the contact sheets. Yeah,
it kind of divides the image in two, diagonally, with the light and the dark, so it's very yin-yang. But the tree, just at the pinnacle, I just find that lovely. If there were photos that I would like to have, it would be this one, the Cucharo Lake tree, or the one that apparently you weren't able to have that was supposed to be in the exhibit, another one from Huangshan with about 12 layers of mountains in the fog, which is just beautiful.
Yes.
That's the kind of photo that you just dream of being in the right place to get, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, right place at the right time with the right equipment and right preparation.
I love this shot of the Chrysler Building. Now, I grew up in New York, and the Chrysler Building is one of the things that is a familiar sight. And again, your composition is interesting because you've shot just the top of the building with the pinnacle of the antenna dead center in the photo.
I was actually on a commercial shoot for this, photographing for HSBC, and I was in many, many different places in New York, and I had the benefit of getting to the top of this amazing skyscraper and being on the roof, basically photographing through the day and into the night. And this was one perspective of the Chrysler Building that I was able to get. I photographed in many other ways too, but this was the most, again, almost haiku-like. It's kind of just the suggestion. It's very, basically, there's, the sky, city, and building, and that's it, nothing else.
Yeah, and you don't even see much of the city. It's like the building itself is rising almost from the sea.
Yes.
The bit behind it could be the ocean. So here's one in Venice. I'm guessing this was shot with a Holga?
No, this was actually with a Hasselblad.
Okay, so this is it St. Mark's Palace and there's a bird flying by?
Yes. Yeah.
Were you there framing it and all of a sudden the bird came and snapped?
It's like many things. If you wander around slightly prepared, you have your camera ready, you're looking for things to happen, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So from what I remember, this is a small section of a much larger negative that I've cropped out, which I do sometimes.
Okay.
You never know.
Yeah.
I don't always print full frame.
Right. So Mont Saint-Michel, so you have a wonderful book about Mont Saint-Michel. A new edition came out a year or two ago. Now, I lived in France for about half my life, and I went to Mont Saint-Michel, and you go to that place, and it is heaving with tourists, and there's absolutely no way to see Mont Saint-Michel in its natural state, but you managed. You went at night. Is that why?
I was very fortunate. I mean, the first time, I've been photographing for years and years and years. This particular photograph, of course, is made from a distance, and so you don't see the teeming masses of tourists. Yeah. I photographed very, very early in the morning before people come out to play and shop. And I was able to befriend the Benedictine monks who lived in the monastery right on the top.
At the top, yeah.
And so I was able to go for 4 or 5 different sessions of 4 or 5 days each, live with them, go to all their services. But I had complete freedom to photograph. And at night...
This was in the morning or at night or both?
I stayed overnight. Yes, so basically at 6 o'clock at night, they closed the doors, the tourists to go into the top half of Mont Saint-Michel.
Yeah.
I was there alone, with a few monks, nothing else. And they gave me a nice old rusty key. I was able to climb right to the top, onto the top of the roof, all the way up to the balustrade here, and photograph at night. I was able to photograph inside the abbey at night. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Now the order has changed, so I don't have that special privilege, but it was great while it lasted.
Worth pointing out that on your website right now, you've got a number of photos of Notre Dame.
Yes.
On the main page, you have a beautiful photo taken from over by the Tour d'Argent restaurant, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And then you have a whole bunch of others of the spire, of different views of it. I was very sad when that fire happened because I lived in Paris for about 5 years. It's such a landmark when you're in a city like that.
It is.
Just quickly, one of your books that I really appreciate is the book of photos in France. And there's something about that. While one could say the Japanese photos have a certain Zen attitude toward them, the French photos are very French. They're very formal. They're very... There's not that much interpretation. They're all shapes and positions and very carefully laid out. Is that intentionally meant to seem French, or is it just a coincidence?
People often ask me about how you change your style, how you come up with the style. And I always say it's something to do with the conversation. So if I'm in a conversation with Japan, there's going to be a certain Asian aesthetic that goes on because Japan changes you, and you change with Japan, and it's a collaboration. Yeah. So if I'm in France, I become a little French, and there's a collaboration with France, and so that conversation is going to be different than the one I have in Japan. Even though I'm the same, it's going to have aspects that will be the same, but hopefully the body of work will be different. And your observation that it is.
I definitely feel it when I look at those photos of the Le Notre Gardens. It's extraordinary. You feel that Frenchness, that rigor of the French. It's really quite special.
It was earlier on in my career too. Basically my career can be split almost down the middle into a European half and an Asian half. Once I started going to Asia, my aesthetic changed. And I think it did become more minimal.
How much time every year do you travel?
It varies. It really does.
Because you've shot in so many different countries.
Now, so I'm home a lot more. But in my single days, it could be easily 6, 7, 8 months. I could be away, and the rest of the time I was in the darkroom.
and you chose to live in Seattle,
yes,
the rainiest city in the United States.
Mm-hmm. That's a good city.
Any particular reason?
Well, I was in San Francisco for well over 25 years, so that was my major city when I went to the States, and then I moved up to Portland, Oregon. And then I kept moving to Seattle, Washington. So,
I have friends in Portland and Seattle, and they both talk about the rain.
It does rain in the winter.
You've lost much of your English accent.
It happens.
You're from the north, aren't you?
I'm from Widnes, yes.
Yeah, so you should have a...
But I moved from Widnes down to London, spent my student years in London, and then I moved to the States.
Yeah.
Accents
It
change.
happens. Yes. I've kept my New York accent. I've been away for 35 years, and it hasn't gone. Okay, a couple more photos. I love this photo of the windmills.
Yes.
This is La Mancha. 4 windmills, as if they're posing for you.
Again, this was another fortuitous circumstance because my agent in London represented Helmut Newton. Helmut Newton had a job to photograph for the Spanish Tourist Board, but the week before he got the flu or something or other. And my agent, who was very smart, saying, well, sorry, Helmut can't do it for you, but Michael Kenna can do it. And I was able to go over and spend 10 days or a week, I can't remember, in La Mancha, photographing windmills. It was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. You've mentioned commercial work a couple of times. There was the one, the Chrysler building for HSBC.
Yes.
I believe you told a story about being strapped to the bonnet of a Bentley to take photos of Rolls-Royce.
Yes, in the sky.
How much commercial work do you do? Is this like an actor does the indie movies and then does the X-Men movies to kind of balance things out?
Quite possibly. I mean, I was trained as a professional photographer. And so when I came out of the London College of Printing, I had to make a living. And I've had to make a living for 45 years in photography, essentially. And it's difficult to make a living by hanging photographs on a wall and having people decide whether they want to purchase them or not. So I've had parallel careers throughout my, I worked as a black and white printer for many, many years. I also have worked as a commercial photographer. I photographed a lot of cars, various products, and various places.
Yeah, there are a lot of them on your website.
Yes,
I particularly like the ones of Chateau Lafite Rothschild.
Yes.
In fact, there's one over here. Let's look at that one. You're filming the vineyard with a dark sky, and you get 2 bolts of lightning. Was that a long exposure?
It is a long exposure, yes. I did a whole series of Chateau Lafite Rothschild. Again, this is one of those, wonderful jobs. I had another one for Dom Perignon where I had to just hang out in Haute-Vière and, sip champagne and photograph grapes,
Chateau Lafite Rothschild is a very good wine.
Yes.
I've had a few.
Yes.
Okay.
Sometimes the commercial jobs have been absolutely fine.
When I look at your prints, they're all editions of 45. That doesn't mean you print 45 of them and then put them aside. Do you print them as people request them as you have exhibitions?
I print them as they're requested. Just in the very early 80s, I think editioning was just really coming in at the time, and I just didn't want. I had one image that sold, I think, 150 prints. I was selling them for $75 or whatever it was at the time through Ghana, and I decided this is not the way to go. That I really need to just say, for collectors and for myself, there's this many prints, you can buy them or not, but this is the end of the edition. When it's done, it's done. And I recently, a few years ago, I changed that to 25, so it's kind of coming down, because I don't have enough time in the darkroom, basically. And so, it's, as you say, I print usually 10 or 15.
Oh, okay, you do.
They're exhibited, whatever, if it's a success and they sell, then I will print it again. It could be a different interpretation.
That's what I was going to ask. Yes. Each time you print it again, you're going to be looking at the photograph from new eyes, thinking, I want to do this differently. So does that mean that there is a different value of number 1 and number 30 because they're different versions of the same photo?
It's a subjective value. I think with the silver gelatin print in general, there are no 2 identical prints.
Right.
Because it's handmade, you're dealing with chemicals, you're dealing with fractions of a second, burning and dodging, which I do a lot of. Each one is unique. Number 1 may be completely different from number 45 or 25, of course, because as if you print something 30 years ago, you probably print it different now. But that is fine. All I'm saying is, from this negative, there's only 25 prints or only 45 prints.
You don't necessarily remember the exact burning and dodging you've done previously.
No, but I always keep an artist proof.
Right.
So I have a reference point.
Okay.
But this one, you see this one is number 1 of 25, and the photograph was made in 1983.
Right. And
so this apparently I had on my website, which I didn't even realize because I'd made a print way back when. It wasn't a very good print, but I must have spent ages and ages and ages retouching it or something. And the gallery here saw it on the website and said, we'd like that for the show. So I said, well, that's fine. And I went to look for the prints. Didn't have any prints, just really bad prints.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know if I can print this one. This is a really tough print. And so this was recently printed, in the past month. Even though the negative is from 1983. And it's number 1 because I never, ever sent it out to the galleries because I didn't like the print.
Yeah. And on your website, you have a section of recent prints, and the dates go in this year to 50 years ago? 40 years ago?
1987, and it's for this bird
is
book.
6 birds.
Yeah, it's this. Because I'm looking for photographs of birds, I went through my whole negative archive and found birds from 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through. And now I'm printing them, so it's a fresh print, it's an old negative, and it's such a wonderful resource to have 45 years of negatives.
Well, do you have thousands of negatives you've never really looked at?
Thousands, yes. I mean, I've seen them because I make a contact print, contact sheet, and I file it with the negatives.
Yeah.
But
you have so many. That...
An image of that you see when you're 25 years of age, and then you look at it when you're 65 years of age. Sometimes it changes.
Yeah.
Your perception of artwork changes. Your perception of your own vision changes, and so you can go back and see. When I did the France book, a lot of that was from older negatives because, again, I knew I was doing this book, and so I wanted to see what I had in my negative archives.
Do you know how many images you've printed? Not 25 of one, but how many different photographs you've printed so far?
Well, because of the filing system we have of the editions, I think we're up to about 3,500.
Wow.
At this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've done about 20 or 30 or 40 books, and some of them are large publishers, and some of them are small. Some of them are catalogs of exhibitions.
Yeah. So we recently updated our website and found there were 72. Which boggled me a little bit. Now I know I'm getting old.
Just before we finish, I mentioned earlier that you did a book of photos of people called Rafu, which means naked women.
Right.
This is an extraordinary book.
Mm-hmm.
I got a copy of it when it came out last year.
Yes. Yeah.
What prompted you? Apparently, you'd been shooting them for quite some time, but what prompted you to finally collect them and publish them? Because it is your first book of pictures of people.
Well, as I said, when I was a student, that was my final year project. Was working with models the whole year with motion and different images, and then when I became a professional photographer, I had to concentrate on something to make my way in the world. So I did commercial work, landscapes, and then I worked with a photographer named Ruth Bernhard, very famous of the nude.
You printed for her.
I printed for her for about 10 years, and she was very adamant about the males photographing females is really not very cool, and I kind of made me a little reticent to kind of delve back into it. And but over the years, I thought, I go to Japan often. I had resources there. I had agents, and they knew dancers and people who worked in offices, and I just began to photograph models very slowly, and I just built up a collection. And it just came to a time when I had a 45-year retrospective exhibition in Tokyo, and they wanted me to print these. And I thought it was a perfect time to come out with a little book, which we did. And they were shown in Tokyo for the very first time. And most of the models came to the opening. It was absolutely great.
That must be interesting.
A big party.
It is a very respectuous book of the women.
Yes.
There are nude photographs that are lascivious, as one could say. There's a book came out a couple years ago that Saul Leiter did of photos in his studio. He never told anyone that he was doing these nudes. It's the same thing. They're not titillating photos.
Right.
And in yours in particular, they're like the Ruth Barnhart or the Edward Weston nudes that are more about the shapes. I mean, some of them, you could almost look at them like a red pepper, like Edward Weston's famous red pepper. He's looking at the shapes and the forms rather than the women.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I want to thank you very much, Michael, for taking this time.
Thanks for
this
being
has been
here.
A wonderful conversation, and I hope this exhibition is a huge success.
Thank you very much. Me too.
Okay, well, as I said, Michael Kenna said so many interesting things about composition that really made me think about my own photography. And I came home and I looked at some of his books, and I have about a dozen of his books. And I looked at some of my photos and I realized, there are so many things in composition that people talk about, and yet sometimes it's the simplest things that make a photo work. And if you look at some of these photos, you'll see how simple they are. And the term minimalist works for some of his photos, like the Sticks and Water School of Photography or that fence in Hokkaido. But not all of his photos are purely minimalist. They're just a very refined sense of composition where things are focusing on a certain point. There's one in particular we talked about early on, that wall at Mont Saint-Michel that kind of leads out toward the left, toward the sea. And I think that's a good metaphor for a lot of his photos, that there is leading to something. As he said, they ask questions, or they're like haikus. I really like the way he said that.
This also harkens back to our discussion with Michael Rubin when we were talking about composition, because I really appreciated one of the things Michael said was, you were talking about the composition of a shot and how he had cropped in to make the composition that he wanted, that he almost rarely prints full frame. When you look at finished pieces like this, you think this must have just been what was in his head at the time, and he figured out exactly what he wanted when he was there, made the shot, and here's the shot printed. And I love the fact that we get a lot more background into his thought process and the developing process, and how making the final print happened as much in the darkroom. He mentioned dodging and burning and cropping, all of that. There's so much more that happens after the picture is taken.
Yeah, we who shoot digital, we don't really think about the printing process that much. Even though you may print some of your photos on an inkjet printer, and you might try to get them right, but you don't have the same options that you do in the darkroom. The one thing I take away from this is just how important the printing process is. Not only in order to get the light correct, but the paper. I asked Michael a question by email, and I said something about how really interesting it was to see the original prints, because I've seen a lot of photo prints, but there's something really special about the prints he does. And he said to me, I completely agree about the original prints. I'm always startled when I view a beautiful finished silver gelatin print. I've experimented with platinum and palladium, but there's nothing quite like an original silver print. I think it takes a discerning eye to fully appreciate how jewel-like they are. And if you look at some of the photos and the detail in them, you can't really appreciate how precise that detail is when you're seeing them on the wall. Remember, these are mostly 7 3/4 inch square. That's really quite small. You have to get up close to get into the print. And I think the silver gives it a tiny bit of dimensionality with the reflections of the silver. And you don't see it as reflections, but it is almost as if there's a light coming out of the prints.
I think this is also something that is largely absent from a lot of people's experience with photos these days, because obviously I can go to his site, I can look at our show notes, I can see all the images and appreciate the composition, the tones that he's used, like everything that I can see on a screen. And yet, if I want to see, any photos in person that are made to this level of quality, that takes a lot of extra work. Like I would have to go and find a gallery, not even a gallery that has his stuff in it, but I would have to find a gallery that has good works, go to it. Again, I appreciate more what goes into this side of it, because I am admittedly a digital photographer who sees things digitally. And even I think getting photo books like that's one step removed as well. And then you get to see the actual prints, the ones that he has literally had his hands on, is still another experience.
Yeah, as I said, I have about a dozen of his books, and there is absolutely no comparison between the books, which are extraordinarily well printed, and the actual prints themselves. It's kind of like mono and stereo. It's kind of like 8-bit color, millions of colors and billions of colors. There really is an astounding difference.
You also mentioned that you purchased one of his prints. Is it something that's in one of the books? Can you compare and say, look, I have this print of this image and see how it looks?
Yes, I did purchase one of the prints. I couldn't really afford the one that I really liked, which was that one of the Cusharo Lake tree. But the one that I got is another of the Cusharo Lake tree prints. We'll put a photo in the show notes that I took of him standing next to the print. The photo that you see on the top of the page for the podcast episode is him in the corner next to that first photo of the Huangshan Mountains that I was talking about. And we'll put the other photo in. This is actually a print that I have in a book. There is a series of books by the publisher Nazarelli, and I'll link in the show notes to that. They are called One Photo Books. And what they are is small books with an original photo. They're done in an edition of 500, but the photos are very tiny. So the one that I have is one of the Cusharo Lake tree shots that he did with a Holga. The print is about 3 inches square, but the rest of the book is another dozen photos of that tree. Now, the print that I bought is in the book, but obviously it's much smaller, and there's absolutely no comparison between the quality of the detail, particularly the clouds that show up in the original print and in the book. And again, as much as his books are beautifully printed, I think there's more of a difference in the quality of his prints than most photographers because of the silver gelatin. I'm sure a lot of photographers do that, but because of the time he spends printing, because he's got 45 years of experience printing. It's a really impressive artisanal object. I was talking with one of the people at the gallery about that there are a lot of professional photographers who may just print inkjet. They'll shoot digitally and they'll print on an inkjet printer, and they'll do a lot of work in Lightroom to get the prints looking good. But there's a huge difference with this type of prints.
Another question that I had going into this was how much he shoots digital versus shooting film. Obviously, most everything that he does is film, and I liked that he talked about that. But he also uses an iPhone, like a lot of us. And I found it very interesting that he mentioned that printing iPhone photos, they just fall apart, he said, which I can't really tell if that's just because he has like really exacting standards or if it's just the image quality period. But I also really appreciated that he said that he wouldn't do like a book of iPhone photos, not because of the quality per se, but because he hasn't put in the effort or the time to do it well. And that would be either making the shots or making the prints. And that just reinforces that idea that, hey, what we're doing, it takes practice, it takes work, it takes focus at any level, especially, at his level or our level.
Yeah, I think the issue with that is that he wouldn't be able to print those prints himself. He wouldn't have negatives that he could put through an enlarger. They would go digitally to a publisher who would print them in a book, and he wouldn't have the control over the detail that he would, even if he spent time with Lightroom, which he may or may not be proficient in. It's worth noting that he's done a book of Holga photos. So it's not the quality of the photo itself. It's not, this is a perfectly sharp lens or whatever it is. But I think it's more that he doesn't have control over the digital process. Whereas with the Holga, he has control over the negative and is able to still print it using his printing techniques, just with maybe a lower quality negative.
One last thing to point out, thinking again about film versus digital, so many of his pictures are super long exposures. I mean, like leaving a camera in a field overnight.
Leaving a Hasselblad in a field.
I know. I can't imagine it. I also like that he sometimes had to go to police stations to recover them. But that is actually something that's very, very difficult to do with digital cameras. You can certainly do long exposures, but at that limit, you have issues of battery power. You have issues of whether that much light, that much exposure is going to, fry your camera sensor, which is just not something that you need to worry about with film. Or if it is with film, you fry a piece of film, you say, okay, that didn't work, put it in a new one, go get breakfast, start again.
But it's a night's work. And I'm sure he's got the calculation down pat to know, he meters it probably, and he knows how much time it is. And with a long exposure, I'm sure you've got a latitude of an hour on either side of the ideal exposure that you can, work with when you're enlarging. But you mess up a photo or your camera falls down, that's a night's work, and you have to come back the next day and start over. It's not like you're just, shooting photos one after another. Okay. Snapshots. Have you got a snapshot this week? In a totally different register.
Totally different. So this week was WWDC, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. And in addition to announcing new versions of macOS and iOS and now iPadOS, that's something new and interesting, there's one tiny thing that I wanted to highlight that is sort of a big deal for me because when Apple introduced the iPad and they made it possible for you to import photos directly from a memory card into the iPad, that opened up a whole lot of interesting opportunities for working with photos on an iPad in the field without a laptop. It inspired me to write my books, the iPad for Photographers. It put me on this path that I'm on right now. But there's always been one big annoying limitation, and that was photos going directly from camera or memory card into your iPad always had to go through the camera roll. They always had to be stored in the Photos application. And then other applications like Lightroom or Affinity could grab the photos from there. But everything always had to be dumped into this one central repository. And finally, with iOS 13, you're going to be able to import your images directly to either the Files app or specific apps. So, for example, you could just dump things directly into Lightroom Mobile and not have to deal with duplicates in Photos and having Photos uploading images while Lightroom is also uploading images. It just takes a big chunk of annoyance off the top. Developers have to implement a specific API to make this happen, but I would imagine after years and years of working around Apple's limitation, they would be really interested in making this happen. Kirk, what do you have for this week?
Well, I figured if we're doing an episode about Michael Kenna's photography, I have to pick one of his books. And I've already picked a couple of his books as snapshots. The one that I'm selecting this week is called Forms of Japan. It was published in 2015. It's 300 pages. It's a very big book. It has 240 of his black and white images made over 30 years. And a number of the photos that were in this exhibit show up here. A number of these photos of the Kushiro Lake tree are in this. When I came home after the trip, I pulled this book out to look at some of the photos. And I'll tell you what interested me. Not only do the prints look so much better than this book, in this book, the reproductions are larger than his actual prints, which isn't the case with his main publisher, Nazarelli. This is a book published by Prestel. And it was kind of strange saying, okay, I know what these look like. I know how big they are. Why is it bigger? Why is it not the exact size? Now, I have now understood that you can't look at a print by Michael Kenna in a book and expect to see anywhere near the same thing as you see in reality. But what I can see is the shapes and the forms and the composition. And I think this is an extraordinary example of fine images. And if you remember, I mentioned in the interview something about how his French images look very French and his Japanese images look very Japanese. And then there's something that just works here. In this interview, I consider myself very lucky to have had a lesson in composition from Michael Kenna as we walked around and talked about the photos. And the additional hour, which wasn't recorded, I suggested in an email that he should really write a book about composition. I think his photos are really great to study composition, and there are so many wonderful examples. So if you want to learn about composition of simple photos, get this book, Forms of Japan. If you don't have any books by Michael Kenna, you'll be very happy.
Okay, I'm going to have to just negate what I said earlier, because now it's clear that you are spoiled, and you can never look at Michael Kenna books again because you've seen the things in real life, and you're going to be like, oh, well, the reproduction of this isn't nearly what it's like to see an actual silver print. So everybody forget what I said. Never go see artwork in real life.
Well, it's really the difference in the quality of the paper. And again, in many of his books, the paper is good, but it's not the same as these silver gelatin prints. And I had no idea. I mean, I'm sure I've seen silver gelatin prints before, but seeing the detail in these small prints, seeing these really thin branches on trees, seeing the subtle detail in clouds, it was really an eye-opening experience.
So everybody, ignore what I just said, because we very much support buying books.
Yes.
And supporting photographers. One last thing, I really like that he also talked about his commercial work and all the other stuff that he does, because again, you get that idea like, well, he's Michael Kenna. Like, he has books, he has galleries, like he has no doubt made, some high level of success for himself. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's, fabulously wealthy. I actually have no idea if he is, but he's doing all sorts of different things, all sorts of different commercial work. We're all out here making it work, so there are different ways of doing that.
And yet some of the photos from the commercial work were some of the most striking. The two that we talked about in the interview, the one of the Chrysler building, which I thought was just an extraordinary composition, and the one of the vineyard in Chateau Lafite, which was, this wonderful composition of the verticality and the horizontality, and then boom, the lightning comes in. That's just wonderful. Anyway, get this book, even if it's not the same as the prints, and you'll see what I mean.
Get the book and then get some prints.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in the show, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or in Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review on iTunes or in your podcast app.